Hello everyone. Today we will learn what is constructors in a Java class. Constructors are special members of a class which are mainly used to initialize non-static members of a class. So when we have a non-static members of a class, if we want to initialize them, we can use this constructor way to initialize them, which we will see in the later part of this class how with a programmatic example. Constructors are executed whenever the object gets created. Whenever we create an object using a keyword new, that time constructor gets called automatically. Every class in Java must have a constructor. That means in Java class there should be always a constructor. If programmer doesn't define any constructor, compiler will automatically add a default constructor, that is called as default constructor, which will be always non-argumented constructor. But if programmer wants to define a constructor which can be of two types, that is argumented constructor and non-argument constructor. Argumented constructors are defined with arguments, whereas non-argument constructors do not have arguments. If programmer wants to write a constructor, then he must follow some of the rules. They are: constructor name should be same as class name. It should not be declared using any non-access specifier like static, final, abstract or synchronized. We should not use any return type, even void, so return type is also not allowed. We can use any access specifier like public, private, protected and default. So these are some of the rules which we need to follow if we are defining a constructor from programmer side itself. So if you want to look at some of the differences between constructor and methods, constructor is a block of code that initializes a newly created object. In the sense, whenever we create an object of a class, so if that class has a non-static members, we can initialize them. That we will see in our later part of the class. Whereas method is a collection of statement which will always return a value upon its execution. That is one of the difference. Okay, and constructor is invoked when a new object is created using a keyword new, whereas method is invoked through the method calls. So we have to call from the method calls. Constructor doesn't have any return type, whereas method must have a return type. So some of the main differences between constructors and methods. Now we will see some of the programmatic examples for these constructors, mainly default constructor example, argumented constructor example and non-argument constructor example. Also we will see how to make use of constructor to initialize the non-static members of a class. We'll create a new class. So we keep this constructor demo A as a driver. We will define our own class here, class sample A. So this is our class sample A, whereas as we discussed, every class in Java must have a default constructor. So if programmer is not defining a constructor, then compiler will add a default constructor. So in this case we have not added any constructor, so compiler has added a default constructor. Okay, now we will go to the main class. We will add a main method there and system output println. We'll print some statement. So here the expectation here is, since this class sample A doesn't have any constructor, the default constructor has been added by the compiler, which do not have any lines of code, which do not have anything to do. So when we execute this class constructor demo A, only this line of code gets executed and nothing is done from the default constructor. Okay, let's see the output. Okay, so you can see here, this is main method. This statement is coming from main method, and since there is no line of code from the default constructor, nothing gets executed. So this is an example of default constructor. Okay, let's move on to the next one, that is programmer defined constructor. Okay, let's create one more class sample B. Here programmer defined constructor. So as we discussed, constructor name should be same as that of the class name. So sample B is a class name, so we are going to create with same name, sample B. And this is a non-argumented programmer defined constructor. Okay, so we are not passing any arguments, hence it is a non-argument programmer defined constructor. Let's have a statement here. This is a programmer defined constructor that is non-argumented. Let's have main method in our main class, and let's have a out statement here for our reference. Okay, so here the expectation here is, in order to call this constructor, when we create an object of sample B, this constructor gets called automatically. And there are different way we can create a object of sample B class. Let's use one method, that is using keyword new sample B. Okay, so now since we are using a keyword called new, which is used to create a new object of class sample B, so constructor within that class sample B gets called automatically. So let's observe the output for this one. So expectation here is, this method, this line will get executed first, and then the constructor statement. This is a programmer defined constructor, non-argumented. So you can see here, the first line is coming from main method, and the second line is because of we have created a new object of sample B, the constructor within that gets called automatically, and all its line of code get executed. So this is an example for non-argument programmer defined constructor. So next we will see argumented programmer defined constructor. So we keep this for our driver class. We create a new class sample C, within which we will create a constructor with the same name as that of the class, and here we are going to pass parameters. So let's say int a comma int b. Okay, so we'll print that. Okay, concatenation operator b. Okay, now in our driver class let's use the main method, and then we'll have a statement. This is main method, and now we are going to create an object of sample C class, but make sure that here we pass the arguments, that is the integer value, say for example 4 comma 6. Okay, that is expected since our constructors are of type argumented, right? You can see here. So argumented programmer defined constructor. Okay, so we have to create an object with arguments. Okay, so there is a small spelling mistake. Let's follow our naming convention with C, and here also I'll change to for our ease of writing the program. Okay, so I have created a new sample C object using keyword called new, and I have passed the arguments 4 and 6. So the expectation here is the first line of code is this is main method, and because of the new object gets created, constructor with the argument gets called and the line of code gets executed. Okay, so this is because we are adding this string to the number, so this gets converted to string concatenation. So let's remove this part for now to understand. We keep only integer parameters, and let's observe that. Okay, so now we are getting 4 plus 6 10. So let's change it to 5 comma 6. 11. Okay, so this is the example for argumented programmer defined constructor. So next we will also see one example how do we use this constructor to initialize our non-static members. Okay, so for that let's create one more class, constructor student demo. Okay, student. Okay, so we keep this main class down. Let's create our class student, and inside this class we will have a constructor that is argumented, programmer defined argumented constructor. So same name as that of the class student. We will define a parameters here, so string name, int id and double percentage. Okay, we are passing these three parameters for the student constructor, which is a programmer defined constructor, argumented constructor. So what are we going to do here is, before that we will define the non-static members in the student class. So these are the three non-static members of a student class. For a student we will be having a name, we will be having an ID and his percentage. So three members for a student class, and a constructor for which we are passing a arguments for these parameters. And then what we are going to do here is we'll use this dot name, and for which we are assigning the name which we pass through the arguments. Okay, getting it? So this, when we say, it refers to the same object member. So here this dot name is this variable. When we say this dot id is this one, for which we are assigning when we call with the arguments that gets assigned to these variables. We will see once we run it. And we will also have one statement. We'll use this dot name here. Both are returning the same. Let's customize this as per our convenient. Just a concatenation of string and the variable, and student percentage this dot percentage. So how are we going to use this constructor in real time? So we have a class where we have different non-static members of the class, and we have a constructor where we are just making the assignment from the parameters which we receive to the non-static members of the class. Okay, this dot name, this dot id, this dot percentage to equal to all this name, id and percentage, and we are printing a statement. Student name is equal to this dot name, student id is equal to this dot id, and student percentage is equal to this dot percentage. Okay, so here what are we going to do here is, so in the driver class we will define a main method, and we will say statement for our reference. This is main method. Okay, and then we will create an object of student. Okay, student s1 is equal to new student. But remember, in our previous class also we used arguments 5, 6 for integer a and b. Same fashion we have to use arguments since the constructor has parameters, right? So the first parameter here is string. Let's say string value here, okay, comma id 001, comma percentage 61, okay, dot 01. Okay, and now we can also create one more object, s2 is equal to new student. Here also we have to pass the arguments Bharat. Okay, so first parameter is string 002 id and the percentage 71.02. Student s3 is equal to new student Chetan. Then we have 003 id, then 81.03. This is a double value. So once we execute, we should get a output. This is main method, then constructor gets called automatically and with these parameters and gets assigned to these values, name, id and percentage, and the printing statement will get print. So 3 times it gets repeated. Let's see the output. Let's clear the previous output. So you can see the first line of code is this is main method. Second one is student name Arun, 00 student id 1 and percentage 61.01. Student name Bharat, student id 2, student percentage 71.02. Student name Chetan, student id 3, student percentage 81.03. So it just ignored the zeros before the numbers, right? Okay, so this is one of the example which we wanted to discuss when we talked about, which is mainly used to initialize non-static members of a class. So we all saw the different types of constructors: default constructor, argumented constructor and non-argumented constructor, programmatic example. Thank you.